stories, we looked at another Mary. This Mary was the sister of Martha and Lazarus. And we all remember what she did. She did something very special for Jesus. She may not have even realized when she did it, but when she anointed his feet, Jesus responded to her and told Martha to bug off, Martha. Mary has chosen what? The greater part, and she has actually dedicated my going to the cross. Really, is what she did. Not knowing that, but eventually she would tell that story too. Can you imagine the stories that she had to tell her grandchildren? If she ever got married, which I think she probably did. But the stories that she would tell. I actually was there, she would tell her grandchildren. I was there. I saw Jesus face to face. I saw the miracles he performed. The next story, of course, is another Mary. As we discovered 6 Marys in the New Testament, and we looked at 3. This Mary, Mary of Magdala, and as we discovered, and new research has shown us, which verifies much more than we used to know about her, that Mary of Magdala was a very rich woman who donated her resources to keep Jesus going as he went around itinerant preaching. Mary of Magdala was the chief cook and bottle washer and financial provider of that evangelistic series. No wonder she got to be what? What was her privileged position? First to see him after the resurrection. And as we discussed before, you would think that would have been reserved for the high priest. Well, don't you think so? Who would the high priest represent? Who was the high priest representing those temple services every day? Representing Jesus himself. So wouldn't you think, here is the Messiah, that the high priest would be the most privileged? And yet none of the religious establishment were privy to see that marvelous thing happen. It was a handful of disciples, but mostly those who seemed to be most important were the women. Interesting. Who says, the hand that rocks the cradle? You know, you've heard that one. Rules the world. Our next story we looked at was not a happy story. That was sort of a sad story. In the book of Acts, the early New Testament church. But that's why the Bible records everything. It records the good and the bad. Ananias, Sapphira, what was their sin? Remember what we studied? Their sin was against the Holy Spirit, one of the most serious sins that the Bible speaks of. And of course, that was not a happy ending. The next story we looked at, again, who would have thought this story would appear in the Bible? If you were in that Egyptian dynasty, you'd erase this one right off the stone. You'd chisel it right off the stone. Because we have the David and Bathsheba story. And yet, despite all the terrible decisions that those two made, and especially David, Bathsheba gives birth to who? Solomon. But as you see on the screen, their first baby that was born after that wrong decisions were made, of course, they lost the first baby, to remind them, and reminds all of us, what is the wages of sin? The wages of sin is death, and we all face it, right? But there is a salvation from that. And that's the beauty of the rest of the story. We then looked at the book and the story of Esther. It has been screenplayed so many times, and the recent one just within the last year. There's scenes from that movie, the story of Esther. And one of the 2 books in the Bible that have women's names. And all that showed us in God's leading. Next, we looked at the story of Sarah and Hagar. Once again, a split and a problem, and we're going to talk about that as history continues today in our study. Our next study looked at Tamar and the things that she was forced to do to survive. Forced actually by who? God's own people. And the things that she was forced to do, and yet God did bless her. Next, and this was just last Sabbath, that we looked at the story of Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah, those three women. Women who were at the end of their rope, that had no other place to go. And God comes through for them, doesn't He? Even though the family made some bad decisions, the husband made some bad decisions. Matter of fact, this seems to be a recurring theme in a lot of these stories and these families that we're looking at. It's more often bad decisions than it is good decisions. And you somewhat scratch your head and say, wow, why would God record all that bad stuff, those bad decisions in the Bible? Folks, these stories are here for a reason, right? Now you can take the stories one of two ways. You can read the stories and you can be greatly informed. And your approach to the Bible is purely for information. And believe you me, you can read the Bible history and get a lot of information. If that's the only way you approach the study of the Bible, then I'm sorry for you, because you haven't gained what the Bible stories are supposed to do in our lives. Once again, repeating, you've heard me say it again, and I'll ask you the question. Do you go to the Bible for information or transformation?
Yes.
Information or transformation? Like Carl said, good to have them both. Let's be honest with ourselves. There's many times we've just approached the Bible for information, not intending transformation whatsoever. You need them both. But the Bible stories don't transform your lives. All they are what? Just a story. And folks, you can go down to the local library and you can read till the cows come home. You can read the rest of your life and read stories. But that doesn't mean they will transform you. And so we look for the God speak. We look for what God's trying to tell us in these